Thank you for joining our Bible study lesson today. Our Wednesday night Bible study. Thank you all for being a part. We've been studying He must increase and we must decrease, humble ourselves. And we know humbling ourselves takes some discipline. Last week we looked at 27 John chapter 3. Verses 22 through, we stopped at verse 27. And last week we discussed humbleness, understanding who God is and who we are. We looked at where Paul applied humbleness to his life. We looked at verse all the way through 28, where John reminded his disciples that he wasn't Christ, but Christ, he was sent ahead of Christ. Then we looked at some Old Testament scriptures where Isaiah 54 and 5, we looked at Isaiah 6 and 25 and Matthew 9 and 15. Then we also looked at humbleness, understanding where we are in God's presence, where people were wondering if John was the Christ, and he denied it. And we have to understand everything about that. So we looked at humbleness from understanding that everything I am and has been entrusted to me to be used for his purpose and glory. That was verse 27, where John answered and said, a man can receive nothing except he give it to him from heaven. This evening, we want to look at and start with verse 28. And we're looking at humbleness is maintained by being having a proper definition of success in ministry. There are two things that we kind of stopped off last week. One thing was success in ministry does not necessarily mean having the largest following. So John was his disciples when they were concerned about a number of things that were going on. John didn't seem to think to do anything to correct the situation. But when they talked to John about their concerns, our brothers and sisters, he explained to them that their cause for concern was not was his cause for joy, because John wasn't trying to build a following for John, but rather he was trying to build a following for Jesus. So sometimes a man, disciples, they're more zealous for their reputation than you are. And he was trying to say sometimes even our members, they can be more zealous for the reputation than we are. I know that the members here loved Reverend Dr. Cameron, and they were zealous for his reputation. They wanted to see him succeed. Some of our members want to see our ministries succeed, so they're pushing for that. So but tonight, and the second thing we look at is success in ministry is to exalt Christ and bring others to do the same. John's aim, I'm just doing just a refresher from last week. John's aim and his joy was to bring the bride to the bridegroom. He was full of joy. He wanted to make sure the people would follow Jesus when Jesus come on the scene and not him. And that takes a lot of strength. Where you getting all this success, Reba, for this amount of time, and everybody's following you and you baptizing them. Now you have someone coming along and he's taking it from there. Sometimes it's hard to give up this success. Sometimes it's hard to give up your position where people really look up to you, and you're leading a bunch of people. Now you got to move out the way. It's even in our ministry, sometimes we can get of age and really can't do the ministry that we was tasked that we was doing for the last 20 years. And we don't want to move. To allow somebody, a young person, to come in and fill it and keep that ministry going. In some cases, some people know when it's time to sit down. and move out the way. So, Benny even, he told us in Preacher Stewart wrote, I want to live. I want to have some time to myself, so to speak, before I leave this world. We can understand that. So, being humbleness, we got to recognize that our role in God's program, and sometimes it's temporary. So this is, we're going to start out in verse 28. That was just a summary from 22 to 27. In 28, he says, "You yourselves bear me witness, that I said I'm not the Christ, but I'm the one that was sent before." 29, "He that hath the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom which standeth and heareth him rejoiceth greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. This is my joy, therefore is fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. He that come from above is above all. He that is on earth is earthly, and speaketh of the earth. He that cometh from heaven is above, and he that sent and heard that he testified, as no man received his testimony. He that received his testimony hath set to seal that of God is true." So John continued to aim. He continued to be joyful. John continued to, let them know that here I'm humbling myself. I understand what it means. So look at John's motto. He must increase, but I must decrease. It's like the morning star. John was fading from the view as the sun rose in the sky. When the sun rises up, do you typically see stars during the daytime? Typically, when the sun's up, the stars are hidden. So he's saying basically when the sun is rose in the sky, the stars fading away. So he's kind of phasing himself out of the position. He's being expendable. He's being implicit. In verse 24, "For John was not yet cast into prison." He's been explicit, for John has not been thrown into prison. When you get thrown into prison, it's easy to wonder about God's sovereignty, about your role in his plan. Imagine, pastors, imagine you in ministry, imagine whatever your role is in the church, and you're doing it for the glory of God, and you're arrested and you're thrown into prison, and therefore you can't be among the people. You begin to think, was I a mistake? Was I doing it in vain? Yeah, he's wondering that because he's in prison. He's wondering, as he sit in prison, was I a mistake? Sometimes we wonder when we get a position, did we get it by mistake? Especially when we're having a hard time with it. Was this a mistake? We come tap you on the shoulder and say, I really, God told me you were the one for this position. And you get in it, and you start out good, and then as it goes, it's get harder and harder and harder and harder, and then you wonder, I don't think I was the one chosen for it. And sometimes we can get tapped on the shoulder and say, we really want you to do this ministry, and you can't do it. But then try anyway. Instead of saying, I won't be able, to handle it. I can't do it. I can think of times for the spiritual formation when I would call people to pray. And there are some that will just tell you straight out. I don't get up that early. I'd rather know that than to say, oh yeah, I'll do it, and knowing you're not going to get on this call. And I've had people to do that. They know that they weren't going to get on, but they'll say, okay. And then when you talk to them the next day, oh well, I really wasn't feeling it. Well, just tell me. And then we'll move on to the next. It's not forcing, we're not asking you, but John is wondering, was our mistake? Sometimes we wondered, is Jesus really the Christ? He sent some of his disciples to Acts in Matthew 11:3. Let's look at Matthew 11:3 because this helps in our lesson. To see 11:3, he said unto him, art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? Is this really Jesus? Is he the one? Are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else? In other words, if you're the Messiah, why don't you get your forerunner out of jail? This is what the people, even John's disciples now, because they got a problem. He's in jail now. He was first out being a forerunner. He was baptizing. He was doing ministry. He got all these people following him. So now he's in jail. Back in those biblical days, in order to say you're a Christian, in order to be a Christian, it wasn't an easy walk. It was not an easy walk. It was, you died. When you claim to be a Christian, you're subject to be killed. In some countries now, you're subject to be killed if you say you're a Christian, even this day. So now they're wondering, well, what if you are so-called forerunner for Christ, if you're Jesus' cousin, if you're doing, why are you sitting in jail? Why can't he go get you out? Right? So Jesus replied. He replied over in 11:4-6. He said, Jesus answered him and said, go and show John again those things which you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he whoever shall be offended in me. Now Jesus gives them something to go talk about. You know how people, they love to hear some gossip. They make the phone calls and, brother, you know this, or sister, you know that, you heard this, you heard that. And, gossip go a long way. I mean, the bad news will go out faster than good news. Jesus is giving them good news to go back and tell John. He says, go and report to John what you hear and see. He said, the blind will receive the sight. Go and tell them that the lame is walking. Go tell them that the lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, the poor have the gospel preached to them. Blessed he who does not take offense of me. What he's saying is, no man on earth can do what I just did. He said, no one here. It's important to remember that being a faithful servant of the Lord does not guarantee a trouble-free life. Just because we are Christians, just because we come in here every Sunday and on Bible study on Wednesdays and on Sunday morning prayer calls, on Tuesday evening prayer calls, and on 5 a.m. prayer calls with the bishop, it doesn't mean that trouble not going to come your way. Satan said he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that means that every time, the closer you get to God, the closer he's trying to knock you away from him. The more you pray into Jesus, the more Satan is trying to get you off balance, the more he's trying to get you off track. It doesn't mean you're going to be trouble-free, because people believe that because they're a Christian, everything lines up like it's supposed to, that the world is perfect, that there's nothing, that nothing going to happen, that things, but the good part about it is that Jesus still, will take care of you. So John was still faithful. He was God-appointed forerunner of the Messiah, but he got thrown in prison. He had his head cut off in his early 30s. That's something. Now, the question to my brothers and sisters, would you be willing, if you knowing that there's a chance that you're going to be thrown in jail, your head will be cut off because you're following Jesus, would you continue to follow him? Because Jesus says that you shouldn't be afraid of man that can destroy this body. But you should be afraid of one that can destroy the body and the soul, this body and the spirit. Which means, yes, someone could take this old body away, but the spirit they can't destroy. Right? It leaves and it goes back to God. So we're not guaranteed to live long lives. We're not guaranteed to be in present. Although we see some people that live long. I'm not sure how old is the oldest one in St. Peter. I know when I was at Spring Hill, she's 96 this year and still moving. I don't know, we have any 96 here at St. Peter? You know, Benny? Anybody? So we got some in the 90s like that? Okay. Brother Cox, okay. That's a blessing. I would love to want to live that long, but I would want to be trouble-free. I don't want no heartaches, no headaches, no backaches, no leg aches, you know. We will want those things, but that's not God. You know, in the Old Testament, it tells us that we're going to grow old and our eyes are going to get dim. Our limbs are going to get weak. Everything is going to start to deteriorate, right? We're not living 500 and 700 years and 1,000 years, right? The average is 70. So we're not guaranteed to live long lives or in our ministries. The Lord could take us out, right? He can take us out today. That's why we should live like there's no tomorrow. We should pray like there's no tomorrow. We should live like, because it's not promised to us. There are people last night that got plans laid out. They had plans laid out for the day, all next week. And they didn't make it to see these plans. Charlotte's cousin, Friday, they had a wedding planned for June the 5th of 2021. Both of them are gone. So we just don't know. He can take us out. Today, his work will go right on according to the plans, right? I know we got one person here retired. You're not retired yet, are you? But if you retire, because Ben is retired, he retired from school. The school's still open. So the school's still open, still going on. It's still going on. If you decide to retire from Sheridan State, you think they're going to close up because you retire? It'll still go on. Some people on the jobs, I've been a manager 20 years, and I would always get people to say, well, I'm going to quit. Well, it's still going to go on. We're just going to replace you. You know? So God's work is still going on until he come back and take us back with him, right? He doesn't owe us anything. You know? I don't know if y'all children ever come to you like mine do, say, well, you know, we didn't ask to come here. You know? They didn't. You know, they feel, he owe us nothing. We didn't actually come here, but God allowed us to be here. He allowed us to grow. He allowed us to mature. And he owes us nothing. It is our great joy if he uses us in some kind of way to exalt Christ and to bring others to exalt him. You know, if we ever wonder what my purpose is on earth besides working a job 40 to 50 hours a week and stacking up your bank account and, counting big head hundreds when you have time. Well, one of our purposes is to always seek and save the lost, to bring them to Christ. Your testimony should be to, tell somebody. We're supposed to go into the world. We're supposed to go into the community and look for those that are lost, that don't know Christ and don't believe that there's a God, and bringing them to Christ. It should be a joy. We're supposed to exalt and bring people to him and exalt him, right? So, in order to be humble, and this is our second lesson, I think I'm going to have about 4 more on this one. In order to be humble, we got to place our entire dependence on God. Not on man. Man or woman will fail us. It tells us, even all the way back to the Old Testament, that we should never put our trust in man, our confidence in man, but put our trust in God. Because man will fail. Woman will fail. So many people will tell you, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do that for you. And they know in the first place they're not, and they never come through to it. But God had never told us anything that he can't back up. God said he cannot lie. He didn't even lie. He never lied to us. Right? Now I know that's hard in some cases. But as Christians, we should try to keep and push each other and be honest with one another, right? So to humble ourselves, let's place our total dependence on God. From every nature of things, the very first duty, the highest virtue of the creature, and the root of every virtue. And the problem is when we don't humble ourselves, the pride will set in, we will lose our humbleness, and it's the root of every sin. And it's the root of every sin and every evil. When pride set in, one of the things you said, the pride of life is not good for us. Right? It's the root of every sin and evil when we let pride set in. So are we working in our humbleness? Are we working to get rid of your pride? That's my question to our brothers and sisters. Are you working to grow and be humble, to humble yourself? And are you working on getting rid of the pride? Those things that you don't want to get rid of, those high praises, those things that will cause you to stumble. Are you working? If I'm growing in humbleness, Christ is increasing. If we are growing together in humbleness, we're increasing Christ and we're decreasing ourselves, right? If we're growing in pride, we're decreasing Christ and increasing ourselves, right? So John the Baptist said Jesus must increase and we must decrease. All right. One last thing I want to look at. And I talked about Pilate in John 19 in my sermon today. Where Pilate frustrated Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't answer him in John 19:11, and told Jesus that he had the authority to either release him or crucify him. Jesus replied, "You have no authority over me unless it's been given to you from above." That's the same way, unless you're living under your mother's roof and that you're not of age, you have your own place, you're moving about, no one has authority over you, right? When you pay your own bills, right, you got authority over yourself. This lesson is important at times because, we find there's so many people that lack abilities, they lack understanding, especially people that shack up. You got a lady that have her own house, and the man moves in, and he's not paying any bills. He's just living there. The woman lets her humbleness get away. The man pride set in, sin sets in, and it becomes a problem. So Jesus was showing us that we got to have a sound mind if we're going to humble ourselves. Sound mind comes from God. The money that we have, it comes from God, right? I was listening to a preacher on the way down this morning on the radio, and he was talking about, the money that we all. Some people pride set in when it comes to money, they forget where it comes from. But everything we own comes from God. So the money we have, it came from God. Use it for God's purpose. Use it for His glory. Ministry, it came from God. So we need to use it for His purpose and use it for His glory. All the things that we do, everything should be done for God's purpose and for God's glory. If we're going to humble ourselves, John knew that he was the forerunner. He knew he was doing things for Jesus. He continued preaching. He continued baptizing. He continued to humble himself, and he continued to do God's work. And that's what we're here for, if we humble ourselves. Okay. And let's go back to John 4. He says in 34, verse 34 in John 3, "For he whom God has sent speaketh the words of God, for God giveth not the Spirit by the measure unto men." Now, when we start our conversations, often, do we start them out with the Word of God? Or somewhere in the conversation with a friend or someone you run across in a store or in the mall, do your conversation start out with, do you humble yourself and start out with the words and the wisdom of God, or do you start out talking about what you have, what you're in the mall for, what you plan to do the rest of the week? Do we give those people any of God's word? Do we speak of the words of God to those people? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I guess it depends on who it is. In 35, "The Father loved the Son and hath given all things into his hand." So we know that even if John tried reigning authority, so he's still going to humble himself. So to teach us to humble ourselves. And then in 36, our last verse, it says that "He that believeth on the Son has everlasting life, and he that believeth not on the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him." In verse 36, it gives us more inspiration to humble ourselves, where "He that believe on this Son," we got to believe on Jesus, the everlasting life. You have everlasting life. If we decrease ourselves and increase him, we'll have everlasting life. And if we don't believe it, if we want the pride to set in, if we want the pride to continue to hurt us, then we shall not see life. We won't see everlasting life. The Word of God is powerful right here, and it really helps us to humble ourselves. He said, "But you won't see life, but the wrath of God abide on him." And we don't want the wrath of God, especially how God was in the Old Testament. So we want to humble ourselves. A lot of things to take place. He brought the wrath down on them, and we don't want the wrath coming on us. So in order to humble ourselves and allow Jesus to increase, we got to believe on him. Believe that he is the Son that God sent. Believe that he rose from the dead. Believe that he's sitting on the right hand of God interceding for us. And we could humble ourselves. All right. Thank you. With probably a different title and a different chapter. But thank you for joining in. And we pray that you've learned some from the Word of God on this day.